All right. So today, this is going to be kind of a language learning French update, but that's not that super interesting because the longer you go into the process, the more the updates sound kind of the same. Yes, you are slightly better at reading and listening and outputting, but no, you're not perfect. No, you're not at the goal you want to achieve, blah, 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 right? So updates are not super exciting later in the process, although they're pretty fun earlier in the process, in my opinion. So I thought it'd be more fun if I did kind of a tier list of what I've read, the last 25 books I read, because I have a fun milestone. I've read 25 or 75 books in French, which is pretty close. I think it's about 6.8 million words, or about close to 7 million words. So I thought it'd be fun to basically do a really quick tier ranking of these books. And what I'm going to do is do them in reverse order. So starting from the most recent backwards, mostly because the ones most recent are most fresh in my mind. So I'll be able to more easily discuss and think about them and rank them. And then the later ones will be a little bit harder. So I'll start with the most fresh and work my way back. But before we get there, let's do a very quick update, kind of where I am at French. So let's go down the list. Anki, where am I at with that? So I quit Anki in November of last year. So why did I quit Anki? It's because I basically saw a disconnect between the words I was learning and my overall progress with the language. I would sentence mine a book, I would learn a bunch of words that I had never seen before, and then I would just never see those words like ever again. Or maybe it would take about at least a year more. But for example, Zazie dans le métro, I sentence mined that book pretty thoroughly. There was a lot of crazy slang in it. I don't think I ever saw those words ever again. It didn't seem worth the effort, I guess. It didn't seem, and the thing is, even if you put them into Anki, it's not like you still have to see the word many times for it to, first of all, go into your passive vocabulary, let alone in your active vocabulary. So it didn't seem to make, I didn't see the sense anymore of doing Anki, basically. I didn't see the connection between me memorizing words and improving my overall ability. Because at the end of the day, memorizing vocabulary is not the same as language learning. It's a tool, it's a catalyst, it's something that speeds up progress, it helps you, but it's not language learning by itself. And so there's this idea that Anki is very useful at the very beginning to get the core 1 to 2,000 words into you really quickly so that you can start immersing. And then in the middle, it's not so useful because you can learn so many words naturally. And then once you pass the middle stage, then Anki is all of a sudden very useful because you don't see those words often enough for them to basically absorb them, to acquire them in the Stephen Krashen sense. I had thought that for a long time. That was kind of my viewpoint, except the point in the middle. I think it's still very useful in the middle. But my perception has definitely changed. I think it is literally just a downward line in terms of how useful Anki is. At the very beginning, it's very, very useful. In the middle, it's really useful. A little bit later, it's somewhat useful. And there's a certain point where it just doesn't seem like it is worth the effort, both the amount of time, even if it's only a few minutes a day, as well as the psychological burden of it, which is relatively small, but it still is there, I think. I always enjoyed Anki. I never had a problem with burnout with it. I never had a problem with maintaining my streak or anything like that. I think over the course of, I don't remember, 2 or 3 years, I missed only 2 or 3 days. Now, how many words did I end up memorizing in Anki? Beyond the original 2 or 3 thousand words that I did, weird way with closed deletions, etc. But when I started sentence mining in the refold sense, I had about 5,900 cards. So 5,900 or 5,900 words in Anki memorized. And after that, I didn't think it was worth it. And from what I've heard from other people, Pere on Discord has mentioned as well that around that point, there is severe diminishing returns for French. And it doesn't mean that I know every single word. And when I read a book, there's still words I don't know, even the latest stuff. But it's at the point where, again, I'm not really seeing any benefit to the active memorization of these words. And second, that my ability with French is high enough where I think just looking up words occasionally and just through exposure alone, I think is all really you can do. I don't think Anki is going to really play that much of a role in acquiring more vocab or improving overall my ability in French. But it's kind of interesting though as an experiment. So if you are sentence mining in French from novels, you'll probably start finding it difficult to find enough vocab at a certain point, and you probably don't need to sentence find more than 6,000 words. Assuming you're not just memorizing literally every single word in every book, that would be super inefficient. But if you're finding I+1 sentences, or sorry, one target sentences, meaning a sentence with one word that you don't know, and then you look it up and the sentence makes sense, then if you're doing that, going through a book that way, I think you're going to not need to do any more than 6,000 words, which is kind of cool. So it means that if you do, say, 10 words a day, that means in 2 years, you don't need Anki anymore, and your vocabulary will be good enough. Again, assuming that you're not just literally brute forcing every single unknown word. That would not be efficient, and I don't think I don't think that would, you would have a lot of words in your head, but I don't think your ability would be there, and you certainly wouldn't have acquired a lot of them. Yeah, so there we go. So memorize 6,000 words in French and you're good to go, more or less. Again, assuming they're one target sentences that come up organically in your immersion, not just, I'm going to take the Lord of the Rings series and just memorize every single word in it that I don't know, like that wouldn't work. But as long as it's one target, you're good to go. All right, number 2, in terms of listening, so I stopped tracking how much I'm listening since December, I believe. So I hit 1,500 hours of listening there, so I'm like, you know what? I don't need to track anymore. I realize like where I want to be versus where I am. There's still that gap. My listening is improving all the time. In fact, since I stopped tracking, I would say I probably immerse more than I did before. I don't think I personally needed to track anymore. I don't think there was any benefit. And again, there was that subtle psychological burden. And it's kind of annoying to keep track of things, or at least my system was, especially things like YouTube with smaller times and stuff. But yeah, again, everyone's different. Everyone's process is different. So you might find that continuing to track forever using some kind of app or whatever might be good for you, and that's cool. But I found hit 1,500 hours. You know what? That's a good place to stop. And so I don't know what my total is, but in terms of my overall listening, again, I don't know. It's not really where I want it to be. Like I say, always, it's improved a lot. I can understand a lot more. I'm learning stuff every day. And I've also been watching a lot more YouTube. And one of the reasons I'm doing that, well, for one, it's just fun. It's just a different area of immersion that I never really did a lot of. I did a tiny bit, but it's fun to explore the different channels, who are the popular people, and the fact that you can choose basically any topic and there will be YouTubers about it. And it kind of solves that problem of just all these domains that a native speaker will know, but you don't because you didn't go through the education system, you didn't grow up with the language. So you can just, if you're interested in dinosaurs, for example, you can just find YouTube videos and probably whole channels devoted to dinosaurs or things like that. And you can get if not the vocabulary, at least just the way people talk about it and the French version of all these words and stuff. And science is kind of a bad example because a lot of science words are very similar to English or exactly the same. But I've also been watching a lot of political videos, so like Baxit and Clément Viktorovich. He's a commenter. He talks about rhetoric a lot, and other people as well. And it's kind of interesting to follow the French election. And one of the things it does, I think, is I feel more invested, I guess, in France in general. It makes me feel like it's sort of my other personality, like my other self, even though I don't have a stake in the election. And in many ways, I don't have any stake in the issues. But it does create a more of a, I guess, a relationship, I would say, with French, that it's not just this abstract thing, but these are real people living their lives in this language, in this culture, and it does make it feel a little bit more real. So, and it also just, politics is not a domain I've ever really immersed in much. And so even though there's not necessarily a ton of words I don't know, but there's just a way of talking about it that I wasn't super familiar with. So as I listen to it more, I get better and better, just knowing like the issues and the politics and the people they talk about, like all the candidates of the election and the jargon and stuff. So that's been interesting. But yeah, in terms of my listening ability, again, I understand a lot. I'm improving all the time. I still have ups and downs. Some days I just feel like I barely understand anything, and some days I feel really good. I still struggle with very natural, whispered or dialogue between teenagers. I still find that difficult. Like movie dialogue really varies between pretty accessible to being like, I'm getting the gist of it, but I'm not getting everything. Yeah. But again, it doesn't really matter that much because I find it enjoyable, the things that I'm watching, the YouTube or TV shows or movies. And as long as I enjoy it, then it doesn't really matter that much how long it takes me, I guess. So, but my unofficial goal, or I guess it's my official goal, but by the end of this year, I hopefully will be at a point of I'll be comfortable where my listening ability is at. And it doesn't mean that I'll be at near native level or native level, but a place where I'm like, if my listening doesn't really improve that much more, it won't feel like I'm abandoning a work in progress, basically. That I feel like I'm basically in a really solid spot. And at the end of the day, again, it's not really about grinding or about improvement, because some people have this idea that it's about you have to have a fixed arbitrary goal so you can work towards, and then once you pass that goal, psychologically you can be like, okay, I'm done with French, or at least I'm good with, I have to stop worrying about improving or whatever like that. For some people, I think that's a really good thing. I think some people need that, and that's great. I guess for me, the way I've approached French is I do have that very goal mindset attitude sometimes, that grinding mindset, like playing a video game. But I've tried to resist that temptation and try to be more about just building a relationship with the language and the culture, so that when I hit my goals, whatever those happen to be, in a way it doesn't matter, because I'm just keep on doing what I always do. Like, it's not going to, there's no gold at the end of the rainbow. I should just be enjoying myself now in the moment. If I'm all of a sudden 10% better at reading or 10% better at listening, am I going to be any happier in my life? Probably not. It's just going to be, I'll feel slightly better when I immerse. Like, I'll just understand a bit more. I think developing that relationship and just enjoying it, just making it part of my life. Like, French is sort of almost my like separate identity in a way. Like, not really, but it's like this weird thing that like the media and the politics and the news and the culture is sort of another part of my life. That's not to say that I don't have like a grind mindset sometimes, that I don't want to like, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to listen this much per day, I'm going to read this much per day, I want to improve this much by this date. Like, I do have that mentality sometimes, but I try to resist that. I try to resist that temptation and just sort of tell myself that just be happy with the language, happy with books and YouTube, and this is just my life now. Like, if I can't learn another language, or if, for example, I'm not allowed to look at any English media for the rest of my life, I have to find a way to be happy with what I have with French media. And I think that's good. I think that's really good, and at least for me. And I like that idea of it being like there's no goal. It really is like, I mean, you can look at it cynically, and it's like Sisyphus pushing up the rock up the hill and it going down. But I don't view it that way. I view it just as just a never-ending thing. It's just kind of just goes on forever. There's no end point. There's no point where I'll finally be happy or anything like that. It's just be happy with what I'm doing, and am I enjoying myself? Is my life happy with French? What place does French have in my life? And that's always evolving, right? Like, what things matter to me change over time. That's kind of my perspective. That's an easy way to excuse, like, why does my listening still kind of suck? But I mean, it doesn't. It's getting better. But those are just some of my rambly thoughts about that. Just to kind of sum up, and again, I read about 75 books. We'll talk about that in a bit. And I have been doing a bit of pronunciation practice, and it's mostly been just reading excerpts from a book and really just listening back and focusing on getting my vowels very accurate. And recently, like, I would say my vowels are generally pretty accurate. I could say words pretty well in isolation, but it's more my rhythm and melody and just prosody in general, like how I say the words and the contours of the lines. That's where I think I have the biggest struggle with. And it's something that I never really listened for in my immersion. And it's just something I'm thinking about a lot more, the way words sort of accelerate in terms of it's oversimplification to just say French is flat, and then it descends at the end and it accents it. Like, you could say globally that's basically it, but I think that's a huge simplification of what exactly is going on. There's melody, there's contour, there's accents within it, even if the pitch doesn't change. And there's just a certain feel. And French from France obviously sounds very different than French from Quebec. And there's different prosody there as well as pronunciation and stuff. So yeah, that's just something I've been thinking about. I've been doing like transcribing as well a little bit, taking a YouTube video and transcribing just a minute of the dialogue, trying to be really accurate, writing it down, making sure my spelling is correct, checking the subtitles. And that's been cool too. I think that helps my listening a little bit. Also, I've been using that script that I create to then learn, and I'll listen to the recording and try and pronounce it as accurately as I can. I've been posting a little bit on Discord. Natives have been giving feedback, and I have noticed a lot of improvement since I've started doing that in terms of my pronunciation. But Again, I'm not really practicing output right now. Well, number one, my main focus is improving my listening comprehension and to some extent reading comprehension. That's what's most important at this stage of where I'm at, because it's probably not as good as you think it is, honestly. I mean, it's okay. I'm getting better, and I have some ability, but it's my number one priority is improving just my listening comprehension and reading comprehension. But I'm dipping my toes into learning to pronounce words and output practice in general, a little bit of writing here and there. But my soft goal right now is about halfway through this year in the summertime. That's when I want to start actually seriously practicing outputting, speaking, and writing on a regular basis, so that by the end of the year, I will have a base of ability of output. Again, it doesn't really have any practical benefit in my life because I don't live in a French-speaking area. I could go out of my way and make French friends, I guess, but I don't know. Friends, I don't know. We'll see. It's just, if you would feel kind of artificial, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'll make friends. That's what my plan is, at least to build a base of ability, just to do it, and just again continuing to improve my listening and my reading. Yeah, so that's what my plan is for the rest of the year. And I don't think I do want to learn another language at one point, though I am resisting the temptation because I want to. French is more important right now, and any language might be important to me in the future, but French is really important to me. It's a really important part of my life. Probably the next language I would learn is Latin, which is my wife has informed me that is a 10 out of 10 on the nerd scale, which I probably would agree with, maybe even 11. An ancient language that doesn't exist, especially if I learn to listen to it and to speak it and stuff, and to actually write it, let alone read the original ancient texts and stuff. I have the arrogance that I feel like it wouldn't be too hard to learn Latin, honestly, but that would be, at earliest, would be January of 2023, at the earliest. But maybe I won't. I don't know. I would like to learn Spanish as well, and probably one other language at most, realistically. Again, life is long. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But, if I started to learn Chinese, for example, I mean, that would be a pretty serious 5 to 10 year commitment, right? To get it to a level where I would want it to be at. That would be the last thing I would have to do. I would have to almost devote a huge chunk of my life to that, and that could be cool. That would be fun, but I don't see myself learning anything like that in the next 5 years. Basically, I would probably. What my vision is by the end of this year, I would be very good at French, hopefully, or into the next year. And then I would probably want to get my Latin level to a really good level. Again, reading with ease and maybe a bit of having a good listening comprehension to some extent, and maybe basic output ability could be fun. And that would probably take at least 2 years, maybe 3, I don't know, maybe 4. Anyways, that's kind of my rough update. Hopefully that's interesting. But let's get to the tier list. So, like I mentioned before, I have read 75 books in French. Woo! Which is actually not that much, considering it's over 2.5 years. And it's not like I'm reading hours and hours every day. I'm only reading 30 to 60 minutes, again, sometimes more. It's not anything, I think, unreasonable. It's not something anyone else couldn't do if they wanted to. You just have to make sure you are reading 30 to 60 minutes every day at a decent pace. Don't look up every single word. Maybe sentence mine a little. And like I said, there's nothing here, nothing that you couldn't do easily. But we're going to go through it. Let's rank the books I've read. So these are the last 25 books I've read. And I'll just talk about each one as we go along. And then I will give it a ranking. How am I going to rank these? So S tier, okay. So let's start S tier going down to D tier. S tier is this is a very special book for me. It's not only an amazing book, but it touched me in a way that I still remember. It left me with, it was a powerful reading experience, basically. No question whatsoever, highly recommend it, etc. A is a really, really good read. It's a great book, but not quite that special tier. It's a really, really solid book. I'd probably recommend it to anyone, but it's not quite in the pantheon of amazing books for Justin. B is still passable. It's entertaining, and it might be a really good book with some massive flaws, or kind of a not so great book, but it's pretty entertaining, trashy, fun book. And that's B level. So it's still it's a pass. Going between B and C, that's the critical line. Anything B and above, I would say it's good. at least entertaining at the very least. C is like kind of not great. Like there might be some redeeming qualities to it. There might be nice prose. Maybe there's an okay story, but there's a lot that I didn't like. And D is kind of trash tier. This is the tier where there's not a lot of redeemable qualities to it. Like I could not recommend it to pretty much anyone. Again, and what am I balancing? I'm balancing sort of the overall quality of the writing from my perspective. Again, I'm not a perfect reader. I don't think my level, I feel kind of like 30% dumber when I read French versus English. So I'm not always the best at assessing the literary quality of a piece of work, but I'm balancing that with my overall just enjoyment of it. So if it's amazingly written, but it's just a real slog to get through, that's gonna bring it down a little. But if it's like pretty like trash tier in terms of writing prose, but I got some enjoyment out of it, maybe that would elevate it up a little. So that's roughly where I'm at. So let's go through it. So again, we'll go through it in reverse chronological order. I'm just going to lift up. So let's start off with the last one I read is called Le Voyageur Imprudent, which is by René Barjavel, who wrote Ravage and La Nuit des Temps, which are like science fiction books. And he writes a lot of science fiction. And I really like him as an author. I think he's really interesting. There's a bit of misogyny, I'll admit, in his writing. I want to say subtle, but it's probably not so subtle, honestly. Women are often just sexual objects in his books. It's not like a big part or anything, and it's not like that distracting. I mean, it's there, though, so just be aware. So I forgive it when I read it, but your mileage may vary. So what is this book about? Voyageur Imprudent. It is about time travel. It is about this soldier who discovers this scientist, and he tells him about this method he discovered to travel through time. And the three parts of the book are about different ways he explores time travel. At one point, it goes 100,000 years into the future and sees the way humanity has evolved into these different subcategories. If you think like Brave New World, sort of like that, but much stranger, much more bizarre, really vivid, really interesting. I would say overall, the story doesn't really feel like a really good cohesive whole. It feels sort of like three almost stories based on the same characters. Overall, I think I really liked it. I think it was very, very unique, very memorable. All right, so where are we going to put this? I'm going to put this in A tier. It may be more of a B tier book in general, but I really like science fiction stories. I really like time travel, and I like this Barjavel's. I like his way of writing. Sometimes it's a bit over the top, a little bit flamboyant, but he has a very weird way of viewing the world that's, I think, really unique, and I really enjoy it. So I would probably put La Nuit des Temps in a similar category. It's probably a little bit better than Voyageur Imprudent, but I would say Ravage is an S tier. It's a classic, I would say. All right, next one up, Mémoires d'Adrien by Yourcenar, I believe her name is. This is a book, it's sort of a quasi-historical, quasi-fictional memoir of Emperor Hadrian, who was an emperor he was one of the good emperors, and he was talking about, basically just talking about being an emperor and about his life and his reflection on philosophy and being a good emperor and his health, etc. And I was really excited to read it because, again, I really am fascinated by the Roman Empire and it's a very strange period of time because I don't identify at all with the Roman Empire. I don't like fetishize it or anything. There's nothing like the glorious Rome. I don't think about it like that because, I mean, the empire was built on the backs of slaves and of incredible brutality and war. So there's nothing I think necessarily glorious or defensible in many ways of the Roman Empire. But at the same time, their sort of whole mentality of the way they organized the empire and this idea of bringing peace, this peace, Pax Romana, to this entire world. And they saw themselves as the empire to bring order to chaos and stuff. Like, it's fascinating, even if it's a bit deranged, I would say. So, yeah, so there's that. Now, Memoir, I was really excited to read this book, but honestly, I was a bit disappointed, I would say. It was a slog. It was a real slog. I wouldn't say necessarily it was hard to read in the sense that like the vocabulary was fine. I didn't find the vocabulary overly complex, but sometimes following the ideas was very challenging. Sometimes he would go on these philosophical rambles about stuff, and it was a very cold book, I would say. Like I know Emperor Hadrian, he was like a Stoic who was I think they're very much about rationality and about being succinct with your words and stuff, but at least I think that's my impression of Stoicism. It was very hard to connect to Hadrian as a person, let alone the people he talked about. So a big part of the book is he had I think he was 18 or 20-year-old male lover. You would never get a sense from the book that he loved this person. He talked about him in such a clinical way. And again, I know that's the intent. Like, this should have been like, I should have like cared about their relationship in any way. And when I didn't, it was just kind of a bummer. Like, again, there were lots of interesting things in it. And specifically, there was a really brutal part where they talked about basically a siege of Jerusalem and fighting the rebellious Jewish people there. And, that was really interesting and brutal. And again, there's lots of interesting parts to the book, but it was a slog. It was really tough to read, to get through. It was kind of boring, parts of it. But again, it is considered this like classic of French literature, especially 20th century literature. So I don't want to go too far in like assessing its literary value because I'm not really qualified to do that. And I don't think my ability is good enough to do that. But I'm going to have to put it in the B tier, because I think there is merit to it, obviously. And maybe if I was better at French, I would be more willing to engage with the philosophical and cold nature of this novel. But as it stands right now, I just found it very tough to read, very slow, pretty boring, no emotional stakes. I had no stakes in Hadrian or his life or any of the people around him. So again, really interesting sort of first-person perspective, a sort of fake first-person perspective of the Empire of Rome. But yeah, so complicated thoughts. I'm going to put a B tier. It's worth reading, I think, especially if you're interested in the material, but just know what you're getting into. It might be a bit of a slog. All right, so I'm just going to move this down. All right, next one is Oscar et la Dame Rose. So this is a book about a boy who has, I think it's cancer, I believe, and he's in the hospital and he's dying. And he has this relationship with this older woman who's a nurse, and it's about him writing letters to God, basically, and talking about life and his last days. It is an amazing book. I loved it, this book. It's not super hard to read, although, if you're a beginner, it might be hard, but it is amazing. I was extremely invested in this kid and his relationship, and even though I'm not very religious, I found the way he thought about faith and was talking to God, I found very moving. I found very affecting. Yeah, it's great. I'm putting it into the S tier. Easy S tier. Maybe not easy. I thought about A or S, but I love this book. It is a highlight of my reading career so far. All right, next up is Bel-ami by Maupassant. So this book I probably would have liked more I might have even put it S tier if it was one of the first of this kind of genre that I read. So Bel-ami is about a young man who's from modest means, and he starts to try and enter into high society of Paris, and like how expensive it is, and how you can go into debt easily, and you can fall into the wrong people, and you're trying to curry influence and stuff. This sounds at all familiar. I mean, I feel like half of 19th century literature is about these topics. And if I hadn't read Balzac first, I probably would have liked this a lot more, especially Illusions Perdues, which is a very similar story. I mean, they have very different styles, and it is fundamentally a very different kind of story. And the main character, I think is really interesting. The way his story and his character changes throughout the novel. It's a really, really good book, and it's not super hard. I mean, it's not like easy, but it's for a 19th century book, it's pretty accessible. And so, just in terms of the quality of writing and the story, and it's really, really good. So I'm pretty happy. It's an easy A tier. Probably could be an S tier depending on how much you like the genre and what else you read. All right, next up, Victorian fantasy, Dentelle et Nécromancie. There we go. So this book is pure trash. Now, I mean, that's probably too far, but I kind of hated this book. It was recommended by a booktuber. I don't remember why she recommended it, but it's by a French author. It's a romantic fantasy. It sort of has to do with like magic and witches and different forms of magic. Necromancy is like taking the dead and rising them up and allowing them to use them for your own purposes. It's about this girl who has like white skin and white hair who is hidden away in her house, but then one day the queen of this imaginary country, she summons her to the castle so she can learn magic. And okay, I'm going to spoil this book a little bit. It's like the first like third of the book, so it's not a huge spoiler, but if you don't want to if you don't want this book spoiled, maybe jump ahead a few minutes in this video. But anyways, The most ridiculous scene in the whole book was near the beginning where she's at the castle and she's a virgin, obviously, because that's what you do in romance books. And she goes out to the castle and goes to the showers. So she gets naked, she's having a shower, and this man comes in and he's crying and he's like super upset and he pulls out a gun and he's about to shoot himself. So she runs out, tries to stop him, naked of course, and like wrestling the gun. And then of course, they don't say a word and then they start kissing and then they have sex. And that's the point they fall in love, kind of. Their relationship made no sense to me. Like he was awful to her, like constantly, and I didn't understand. And of course, she got pregnant from that one encounter, and then they had to get married. Of course, it is ridiculous. Now, I will say the sex scenes were well written. You know what? I was into them, but the rest of the book was very silly and not very well done. Sort of this weird pastiche of like Harry Potter and romance, like Victorian romance and other things like that. Maybe if I was like more into the genres inherently, I would be like more forgiving of some of these things. But it was a very silly book. It was also not so easy to read because it was written in a very, very elevated fancy style, almost like artificially fancy. So I did not really dig that. And there was like, again, sex scenes pretty well written, I would say. And also the final battle was also not bad. It was pretty serviceable. So I like that as well. But overall, it was not that good. So I'm going to put it into D tier. I'm not saying there's nothing redeemable about it. And if you really like the genre, it might even be up to a B tier maybe. But I'm going to put it down there. All right, next up, Le Horla by Maupassant. So this is talking about not just the short story, the Horla, but the collection of short stories that were published with it originally. So if we're just talking about Le Horla, the short story, that's S tier. Wonderful short story, amazing. Everyone should read it. It's wonderful, creepy, excellently written. It's like one of the best short stories of all time. The rest of the collection, not so good in my opinion, or at least I didn't like it very much. I found the stories kind of pointless often, or like kind of corny or cheesy. Like there was some good ones. There was this one where this guy was like, he was really possessive of his fishing hole, and at one point someone comes and steals his spot, and he's very upset. Like I like that story. It was pretty funny. And there's another one where these two men are in like a cabin, and it's like they're frozen and snowed in basically, and that was also like pretty interesting. But overall, I was like not super into the stories. Like they were decently entertaining, well written, I guess, but I didn't love it. So I'm putting that again. If we're just talking about the short story, Le Horla, I'm putting that S tier. But in terms of the short story collection, I'm putting it into B tier. So worth your read. Again, depending, your mileage may vary, but it's entertaining. But I didn't love it. All right, next up, Les Guerriers du Silence. Les Guerriers du Silence. So this is a science fiction book. It's about this evil race of beings who have these telekinetic and psychic powers to like see into the thoughts of people's head, and they sort of just enter this empire and slowly through political manipulation start gaining more and more power in this empire. Try to overthrow the current order and establish their power in this empire. There's this main character is just kind of a down on his luck guy working in this like kind of outer planet area. And one day this woman shows up and changes his life forever, and he goes off on an adventure. This book was okay. It's kind of a huge Star Wars ripoff. Like there's like a Princess Leia, there's a Han Solo equivalent, there's a Jabba the Hutt, there's a Tatooine, there's a Darth Vader equivalent, there's even sort of a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy element I could see in it, and other things like that. Like it really does feel like a pastiche of other better works, to be honest. And I know you could say like, oh, Star Wars is so influential, and also like what everything is influenced by it, and also like hero's journey just in general is relatively. There's even like a Yoda character and like an Obi-Wan type character and stuff. I'm like, and like stormtroopers and stuff. But it's too much. It's way too heavily influenced. There's not enough originality in it, and the original stuff is like somewhat okay. Like it's somewhat interesting universe, but yeah, it wasn't that great. And also, in addition, I found the writing style pretty hard to read, and maybe that's just my fault. Maybe I'm not good enough a reader, but I found some of his descriptions very hard to follow, and I would have to get to like the end of the chapter before I finally like put the picture together in my head about what was going on in the chapter. So I'm not saying it's like depending on how much you like the genre, I don't know. It's tough to say, but I'm gonna put it probably in C tier. It's like overall a negative impression on it, even though there is some redeeming qualities. Maybe if I was in a better mood, I would give it a B tier. For now, I'm gonna put it in the C tier. All right, next up, Le Bal des Folles, which is a book about 19th century France and about women who are seen as not conforming to the rigid standards of society, basically put in an insane asylum, a mental institution. There's also a supernatural element to this book where this girl sees ghosts, and of course, people are not super ready to hear what she has to say about that. So this book is great. This is really, really good. It's not that long. It's not super hard to read. I love the story. I love the characters. I like the theme of. I like the feminist themes in it. Honestly, I thought it was really, really good. Yeah, I have to say I recommend it highly. I wouldn't say it's quite S tier, but it's definitely an easy A tier. It's probably just not quite substantive enough to qualify as S tier, but I really, really liked it. All right, next one. This is I'm going to spoil this one, so maybe jump ahead to the next one if you don't want to spoil it. It is kind of like a big book in science fiction in French, but yeah. So this book is okay. So this is Gagner la guerre, which is about. It's sort of like it's high fantasy, but it's set in sort of a quasi-Renaissance Italy. So, I mean, I don't know a lot about Renaissance Italy, but that's what people talk about it as. It honestly reminded me more of the Roman Empire, but I don't know. I guess it's sort of similar. And it's about this sort of terrible criminal for hire, essentially, who sort of is attached to basically the king or the emperor. They have I think they're called consuls in the book, and there's two of them at all times. So there's two people always ruling at the same time, and he's sort of connected to one of them. And the book starts basically with this huge naval battle, which is really cool, and he's basically tasked to do some dirty work for the consul. And as a result of that action, there's a lot of political turmoil, and you can see kind of the events of the beginning of the book sort of play out and reverberate, is that the word? Ripple throughout the whole story and the effect of it. So the way I describe it, it sounds pretty good. And again, the quality of the writing is really, really good. Very vivid, very interesting descriptions that I remember so much from this book. Especially the opening naval battle is incredible. It's super great. Now, it's pretty hard to read. There's tons of difficult vocab, like extremely rare vocab. There's this one scene where the main character is talking to another friend they were both part of the same thieving guild, but they use a lot of slang, street slang from 19th century, and it was impenetrable. I could not understand what they're saying. I would look up the words, but it's I would forget what the previous word meant before I got to the next one, and so I would barely understand their conversation. It wasn't a huge part of the book, but I was honestly wondering if would a native speaker understand this conversation? I honestly don't know. And that was kind of the effect. The effect was to make it impenetrable for other people to understand in the story. But I think you're meant to understand more than I did, but I'm not really sure. So if it's so good from what I describe it, what's the problem? Honestly, there is one scene that ruins the book. And so again, I was going to totally spoil this book. So if you don't want to spoil it, just skip ahead to the next book. And again, content warning right now for the next couple of minutes. So if sexual assault is a sensitive topic for you, maybe skip ahead to the next book. Anyways, there's one scene in the book where he has this sort of friendship with the daughter of the consul, so essentially the king. And she's 15 years old, I believe. I think 15, yeah. And at one point, he came home drunk. He came to the castle drunk. He was at a tavern or a pub, and there was prostitutes there. But there was some kind of fight, so he wasn't actually with the prostitute that night. So he went back, and he was in their garden, and she was just there. She was kind of she tags along sometimes. She's just kind of annoying and teases him and stuff. But maybe she has a teenage crush on him or something. And then at one point, he basically tries to kiss her and have sex with her. And again, she's a teenager, so she, doesn't really make good choices necessarily, and she kind of goes with it, and she's fine with it. And then at one point, he just rapes her, just like that, in a really gruesome and brutal way. And I'm and it was awful. And the problem with it, again, it's not that I necessarily would be it's not that you can't depict rape in a book, but it's not like the book was about, oh, this is a rapist and we're going to follow the psyche of this person and understand the horror of what this person is and the implications of that. Sort of like Lolita, I believe. I haven't actually read that book. My impression is that it's sort of from the man's perspective, who is this child abuser essentially and this pedophile, and it's like following from his perspective and like how he's, and it's not that at all. Like it's just a part of the book to make him seem like a bit more of a bad guy, like an anti-hero. And then the story just sort of moves on. He kind of tries to cover it up and prevents himself from getting caught. And then the story just sort of moves on to the other issues in the book. And at the end of the book, he has to rescue that princess or rescue that girl. And of course, she doesn't like it because he's a rapist and she hates him. But at the same time, it's this really exciting climax where he rescues her from, I think, a burning castle or something. And there's this really amazing rescue scene and stuff. So that one choice in the book completely undercut the entire story because you cannot enjoy the story anymore. You cannot root for this person. You cannot enjoy him saving the princess like this escapist fantasy. You can't do it. It's just always in the back of your mind that like this is the thing that this person did, this irredeemable thing. And because the structure of the story is that we're supposed to go along with this person. We're supposed to root for him. We're supposed to hope that he succeeds and whatnot, right? Like that's the structure of the book, in my opinion, and that it's not meant to be like this, like analysis of this psychopath or this criminal or this awful evil person, sort of this first person perspective. It's not that, I don't think. It is like an adventure, high fantasy story, but then just completely undercut by this one choice. You wouldn't have to do much for it to be to not be undercut by it. You could just change that scene so that he doesn't like brutally rape her. Like it wouldn't be that hard, and it wouldn't change the story that much, but it would actually make it like we could actually read this story and not feel horrified and like sick by it. And so yeah, so long story short, I'm giving it a B tier, which is maybe too high, but it's like really conflicting because it's really well written and very memorable. I probably would give it an A tier if it wasn't for that. It probably deserves a D tier just for that scene, but balancing out, I guess I'll give it a B tier. So you're warned. I don't know. I feel like I'm still thinking about that book and the choices that the story has made still, even though I read it a few months ago. Anyways, let's move on. All right, Kiffe-Kiffe Demain is about a girl. It's sort of like the season 4 of Scam France, if you've ever seen that show. About this Muslim girl and growing up and coming of age and relationships and learning how to be a Muslim in a French society and etc. So not much to say, I guess. It's really good. I liked it a lot. Let's do it A tier. All right, the next one. It is called La plus secrète mémoire des hommes. So this won le Prix Goncourt, which is the most prestigious, supposedly, award in French literature. Yeah, it follows the story of this young Senegalese author who's living in France, and he learns about this book that was published in the World War II era, around there, and that it was a huge sensation, this book, but then the author just disappeared, and the book went out of print, and no one can ever find it, really. And basically the story is about him sort of learning about the mystery of this book and the persona around it. And there's sort of an element of magical realism in it as well. It is an incredible read. Like, I devoured that book in a way. Like in the book sort of haunts the main character, and sort of he's obsessed by finding about this book and about this author. And in the same way, you as a reader sort of become obsessed with this novel and learning about these different characters. And it jumps around in different time periods, different parts of the world, in Senegal, I believe it is, and in France and other parts of the world. And so it is a very good read. So it almost reads like a thriller, but it's like really interesting prose and really well written and etc. I'm not quite ready to give it an S tier. So in terms of just a pure reading experience, wonderful, wonderful book. Just upon reflection, it's probably just not quite as great as it's not that it's not great, it just it's not quite there for me. It's not S tier, but it's very, very, very good. It's like A+ tier, so let's put it in the A tier. All right, next one, Aliss. So this is trash, but it's very entertaining trash. It's about it's by Patrick Sénécal, one of the only French-Canadian authors I've ever read, and it's about this girl who sort of it's like Alice in Wonderland basically, but it's sort of a retelling of it, and all the characters in Alice in Wonderland are in here represented, but by more of a gritty, realistic like violence and drugs and sex kind of thing. So they're not actual animals, but there's like a person that represents the Mad Hatter and a person that represents the Queen, for example, etc. So like Patrick Senecal cannot write women like at all. His female characters are awful, and like no woman would ever describe their sexual experiences or like their view of the world. Just the way she acts is just not how a normal human woman would act, I don't think. Maybe a woman can read it and tell me how they feel about it, but it's just ridiculous, some of the thing. That being said, it's trash, but it's somewhat entertaining trash, I'll say. So I probably can in good conscience give it a B tier because like I want to almost, because I was very entertained reading it, I'll admit, even if it is just garbage. So I'll put it in C tier. Like I probably enjoyed it more than Les Guerriers du Silence, but yeah, I can in good conscience give it a B tier. That's what I'll say. All right, let's move on. So next one. So this is all the Balzacs. I sort of talked about this before, so I'll go pretty quickly through them. So Illusion Perdue, I'm going to give that in A tier. Very good. It's sort of similar to Bel-ami, and it's really well written. It's really long. It's really dense. It's not so easy to read, but there's some really, really powerful passages in it. It's like even though I felt a little burnt out by Balzac when I finished it, I think it left a strong impression on me, and I think it's very, very good. But it's about this young man who goes to Paris, and he learns to be a journalist, and he learns to live in high society, and etc. So if that sounds familiar, that's because it's kind of similar to Bel-ami, but I would say it left a good impression on me. La Cousine Bette and La peau de chagrin, I'll put B tier. Just because, again, I barely remember them, honestly, in hindsight. Like, I remembered the basic story. La peau de chagrin is about this guy who he has this fur pelt, I guess, that he can make a wish, and then every time he makes a wish, it shrinks a little bit. And I don't know, I didn't love it. I like the concept, but the story itself, I was just like, whatever, it's fine. And same thing with La Cousine Bette. It's about this woman who sort of takes revenge on her family, and there's a lot of stuff and vocabulary about high finance and stuff that was really hard to understand. Yeah, like I said, just kind of I didn't love them. Like, again, I'm not saying they're badly written. Again, maybe if I was better at French, maybe if I could read better, I would appreciate it more. For now, we'll stick in B tier. Again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm really factoring in my personal enjoyment of it, not necessarily saying that it's the same quality as the others. Okay. And lastly, Le Pere Goriot. Easy S tier. It's a wonderful story. The characters are great. It's a very touching relationship between the young man and the old man, and it's very vivid. There's the opening; it almost feels cinematic. The way it's the description sort of swoops in and takes a view of this place where people live, and like this sort of hotel type thing. And yeah, it's a wonderful book. So I don't know, not much else to say. Again, as we're getting closer to the end here, my memories of it are a little bit fuzzy, but wonderful book. Zazie dans le métro is about this girl who, just about her day, and it's kind of a zany book about her. The metro, there's a strike, so she can't go on it, and she kind of just goes around Paris and her zany adventures. It's written in a very difficult style, a lot of slang. It was good. I liked it. It was worth reading, so we'll put it A tier. All right, moving on. Le Vide, another Patrick Senecal book. I would say it's better than Aliss, at least in terms of just overall not being horrible and ridiculous. I mean, there's a lot of horrible and ridiculousness in it. It's about this, basically it centers around this reality show where people can go on the show and wish for whatever they want, and then the show will sort of put it into motion. So one person, basically, their fantasy was to drive like a high performance sports car, basically, through the streets of Paris. Basically, that was his dream. And so the TV show paid to block off the streets so that he could do it. And at one point, I think he crashed. But it's a sort of a thrill, and there's sort of like this dark secret behind this TV show. And I think some people ended up being murdered at one point. So it's a thriller. It's a very long book. There's a lot of twists and turns. It's very exciting. It's very popcorny, fun to read, not too hard. So I would definitely recommend this over Aliss. That's definitely a sure. So I'm going to give it a B tier. It's entertaining enough. It's fun to read. Not much more to say. Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, the French. It's one of the few French translations I read. It was part of an online book club. It's about the son of, I don't know, he's the son of some god. Maybe, I guess he's the son of Zeus, I believe. And he learns that the Greek gods are real, and he has to go on this adventure to find something from, I think he has to get the lightning back to Zeus, so there's not some kind of war or whatever. I don't know. It's kind of hazy. I'm sure the book is better in English, but I found the translation very bad. The writing was very bad. It felt very literal, some of the translations. And I found the story just kind of bad or not very interesting to me. I have a bias against young adult fiction, I'll admit. I very rarely enjoy young adult fiction. I try my best, but I don't find it very interesting or engaging. So it's not D tier, but I'm going to put it C tier. It's just like, nah. I mean, like, I definitely enjoyed Aliss a lot more. Maybe it's D tier. Yeah, let's put it D tier, because I did not enjoy it very much. Like, I'm not saying there was nothing redeemable. There were some aspects that I enjoyed, but overall I did not like it very much. All right, next up, Le Petit Nicholas. So what is this book about? This is about a young boy and his sort of ironic observations about his family, his school, and his friendship with his friends, and etc. Sort of a slice of life of like an ideal version of 1950s France, I think, is what it is. It's good. It's really good. I mean, I only read the first collection of short stories, and I probably won't read the rest, but let's put it in A tier. All right. Pietr le Letton, a Maigret story, which is a detective, I guess. I think he's a Belgian writer, and the story is about, I don't really remember very much, honestly. I think there's a murder. He's like, I think he's trying to find this, he's like this master criminal that he's trying to find, basically. I think it's the very first novel in this series. I think there's like a dozen or two, a couple dozen novels in this series. Very famous Belgian detective. I did not like the book very much. Like, it was somewhat entertaining. I liked it enough. There was this like kind of casual racism in it though that I didn't care for, and I didn't find the story that engaging. It's sort of a little bit of a dense style as well, so I didn't love it so much. So let's put this into C tier. Like, there's some things in it that I liked, but I didn't love it. Notre de Paris by Victor Hugo, easy S tier, no question. Wonderful, wonderful book. It's sort of a celebration of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is probably even more important now, considering they're reconstructing it, and after the fire. And, it's about this Quasimodo character, hunchback, who lives in the tower, his relationship with this, I think he's a cardinal, I want to say, and this woman who is I think a gypsy, I want to say. I know that word is not Romanian. I apologize, that's probably not the great terminology, and it's sort of this big romantic story in terms of like not romance, but like the romantic movement, like huge emotions and huge drama and horror and excitement, and the final battle against the Notre Dame Cathedral is incredible. It's extremely interesting. The first third of this book is brutal, though. It is very slow and very hard to read with tons of detail and description. It moves at a glacial pace, but once you get past sort of a hump when one of the characters go to like the thieves' den or the thieves' hideout, the story just progresses forward really well. So easy S tier, wonderful, wonderful book. I mean, he's one of the most celebrated authors in French literature, so there's not much. I'm not breaking new ground saying that Victor Hugo is a pretty good author, but I love this book. All right, next one is, what was it called? Le Club, I don't know how to say that in French. Le Club des Cinq et le Trésor de Vide, which was also part of a book club online. This book's really good. It's children's literature, I would say, or middle grade. I don't know how you would describe it. It's about these kids on vacation, and then they learn about this little island that they own, and they're trying to find treasure on it. It is excellent children's literature, I would say. I'm not probably going to say S tier, but I'm going to say A tier. Really good. Again, it's a translation, so like the translation is fine, but I don't, as you can probably tell, I have kind of a bias against translations. I don't really like reading them very much. I do want to read things originally in French. There does seem to be a difference in terms of what it feels like to read a translated book versus non-translated. I know French people read translation books all the time, translated books. Like it's sometimes hard to read watch booktubers on YouTube because they always just talk about translations into French, which is sometimes annoying, but I don't personally like reading translations. But not that there's anything wrong with that, I just personally don't like to. All right, next one up, second last one, is La Dame dans l'auto avec des lunettes et un fusil. So this is a mystery about this woman who gets into some trouble. It's hard to talk about. It's a bit of a mystery, and there's like a crime that's committed, and she's on the run. That kind of story. But it's a very strange book, and it's very confusing what's going on. It's good though. I liked it. Again, it's a little bit of a hazy experience in my memory of how good is it. Is it a B tier? I would say it's better than B tier. I liked it a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's better than all these B tiers, so I guess it has to be an A tier. Maybe some of these A tiers should be in the B, and some of these Bs should be in the C, but we'll put it in A tier. All right, last but not least is called Le Feu dans le Ciel, which is it's the other French-Canadian author I guess I read. And it's sort of a high fantasy series about this order of knights. And there's this insect king, I think, who is threatening their kingdom. And there's this princess that asks the knights for help and stuff. Again, I only read the first volume. In the first volume, not a lot happens, but it's a whole long, I think, 12-book series. So I only read the first one. It was good. I liked it. It wasn't too hard, but I have positive experiences about it. But it just kind of, just kind of fine, entertaining enough. So yeah, so there's my list. I have 3 in S tier, 10 in A tier, 7 in B tier, 3 in C tier, and 2 in D tier. And yeah, I don't think I would change any of these. Again, it's possible that I could have shifted some of the A's to the B's and the B's to the C's, but I'm pretty happy with that. And so that's pretty good though. Again, anything in the S tier and the A tier I can probably recommend, except for maybe Illusion Perdue, which it's a bit heavy of a book, like in terms of the writing. Like not necessarily, I mean the topic is heavy, I guess, but just the writing is a very heavy and very dense book. And maybe like your mileage may vary on Le Voyageur Imprudent, because depending on how much you like Baucheval, it could be more of a B tier. But anyways, that is my update. That is my tier list of books that I read the last 25. The next 25, I guess I'll do this again to see what I thought of the books. And again, like I said, I would say anything in the A and S tier are very, very readable, very good. Again, your mileage may vary. And yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Bye.